You think evil needs a monster. Someone twisted, someone broken, someone you could spot in a crowd. It doesn't. For 3 years, in a sealed compound the size of a small city, over 3,000 human beings were infected, frozen, dissected, and burned alive. And the people doing it wore lab coats, kept tidy notebooks, and went home for dinner. No one who walked into that compound ever walked back out. The death toll might be 3,000, it might be 40,000. We genuinely don't know, because the people running it were that good at their jobs. So here's the question worth sitting with. How do you get hundreds of ordinary educated people to spend years doing this and call it a Tuesday? Let's set the stage. In 1925, the world signed the Geneva Protocol, banning chemical and biological weapons. World War I had just shown everyone what gas warfare does to a human body, and most nations agreed, never again. Imperial Japan signed it too. But here's the thing about a ban. It doesn't stop you from wanting the weapon. It just tells you to be quiet about building it. Through the 1930s, a Japanese army surgeon named Shiro Ishii made a pitch to his government. Biological weapons are the future, and whoever masters them first wins the next war. His superiors agreed. In 1932, they put him in charge of a new research unit with an almost soothingly bureaucratic name, the Epidemic Prevention Research Laboratory. Publicly, its job was to protect Japanese soldiers from disease. Privately, its job was to learn how to spread it. There was just one problem. You can't perfect a biological weapon on paper. You need bodies, living, breathing, healing, dying bodies, to know if it actually works. And in 1930s Manchuria, occupied by a Japanese army that viewed the local population as barely human, that problem had a solution. This is where the first reveal happens, because at first, this looks like a research program that went too far. A few scientists, a remote outpost, some terrible decisions. That's the comfortable version. That's not what it was. By 1939, the operation, now officially designated Unit 731, had grown into a complex of over 150 buildings spread across more than 2 square miles, staffed by an estimated 3,000 people, including roughly 300 dedicated specifically to human experimentation. It had its own airfield, its own crematorium, its own internal economy of horror, running on a schedule with funding lines and promotion tracks like any other government department. This wasn't a rogue cell hiding from Tokyo. It was a fully resourced arm of the Japanese military, reporting up the chain, expanding year over year, because it was delivering results. So how do you hide a death factory in plain sight? You build a fake one next to it. Visitors to the compound were shown an elaborate welcome center, an entire building constructed purely for show. The actual work happened underground, in tunnels and cells the public version of the facility didn't admit existed. Even the cover story for the compound's location, deep in the woods, away from prying eyes, was that it was a lumber mill, which brings us to the word they used. Inside Unit 731, prisoners weren't called prisoners. They were called maruta, which translates to logs. Researchers would ask each other, in casual hallway conversation, how many logs were used that week. Published papers about the human results of these experiments described the subjects as long-tailed monkeys, so the science could be filed, peer-reviewed, and cited, without ever admitting what, or who, had been cut open to produce it. Here's the analogy that should make your skin crawl. Imagine spending your career inventing a language so precise, so clinically distant, that you could describe murdering a person in a way that felt no different from logging a delivery of firewood. That's not a slip of the tongue, that's infrastructure. That's an entire vocabulary engineered, on purpose, to let people sleep at night. Now, the second reveal. You might be thinking, okay, so this was systemic, calculated, industrial. Surely, at minimum, the actual experiments were in service of something, some twisted version of medical progress. That's the last comfort this story offers you, and it's about to go too. The people brought to Unit 731, mostly Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, along with Russians, Koreans, Mongolians, and Japanese political dissidents, were transported in windowless vehicles so they could never identify where they'd been taken. On arrival, they were often given an injection for their health. It was usually a disease: plague, anthrax, cholera, typhoid, whatever the weak study required. From there, the experiments ranged from the clinically grotesque to the openly sadistic. Researchers froze prisoners' limbs solid, then thawed them to study the tissue damage in real time. They placed people at measured distances from explosives to calculate how shrapnel travels through a human torso. They performed vivisections, live dissections, on conscious patients without anesthesia, because anesthesia might alter the test results. The average life expectancy of a person who entered that compound was about 2 months. The lucky ones died fast. And remember, none of this stayed contained. Unit 731 also ran live-fire tests on entire Chinese towns, dropping ceramic bombs filled with plague-infected fleas over populated areas, then tracking how the disease spread through the civilian population in the weeks that followed. This wasn't a laboratory anymore. It was a live rehearsal for genocide, conducted on whole communities who had no idea they were already inside the experiment. So, after all of that, here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. When the war ended in 1945 and the full scope of Unit 731 came to light, almost none of the people responsible faced justice. The United States, racing the Soviet Union into the Cold War, made a quiet trade: full immunity from war crimes, prosecution in exchange for every page of data Unit 731 had produced. Shiro Ishii, the architect of all of it, lived out the rest of his life freely, and reportedly died of throat cancer in his 70s, never spending a single day in a courtroom. The very thing that should have buried this program, the sheer, deliberate scale of its cruelty, is what saved the people who built it. They had made themselves too useful to punish. Here's what stays with you, long after the facts fade. We like to believe cruelty announces itself, that we'd recognize it the moment we saw it, that it would look like rage or madness or a face twisted into something inhuman. Unit 731 proves the opposite. It proves that the worst things people are capable of don't usually arrive wearing a snarl. They arrive wearing a uniform, carrying a clipboard, speaking in calm, careful, professional language. Language built, brick by brick, specifically so that no one involved would ever have to feel the weight of what they were doing. That's the part that should follow you out of this video. Not the number of victims, not the names of the diseases. The fact that an entire system of horror ran for years, smoothly, on the quiet permission people give themselves the moment they stop calling something what it actually is. Somewhere, right now, someone is doing something they know is wrong, and they've already found the word that lets them not think about it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.